Hi, and welcome to a new episode of Don't Be a Man About It. Today's topic is one of the closest to my heart, empathy and the human connection. And there's no one best or better than Cole Egger to discuss this topic, the co founder and the CEO of Listeners on Call, which provides on call empathy. How cool is that? Cole, hi, and thank you so much for accepting my invitation to be on the show.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Ray. I really appreciate you having me on the show today. And I think I shared with you, I really do love the name of your show. It really hits home and gets straight to the point. I think in the world we live in today, we need more of that.
Thank you. Thank you. So, could you just introduce yourself and tell us more about listeners on call?
Sure. My name is Cole Egger. I'm a 20-year serial entrepreneur who is working daily to become more comfortable in sharing my own personal story and overcoming many of the personal challenges that I faced throughout my entrepreneurial career. I've been very fortunate to be able to co-found with an amazing business partner, Listeners on Call, that I truly believe has the opportunity to impact the world at large by providing scalable solutions with empathy. And I think, you said it earlier, empathy on demand. We oftentimes get coined the Uber of empathy. And so that's something that we really lean into.
It's a much needed service, to be very honest. It's really much needed. I cannot highlight it enough. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we before we dig in, tell me, how is your heart doing?
As I shared, I've listened to several of your podcasts, and I knew that was coming, and I was going to actually get ahead of you, and I was going to ask you first, but maybe you can tell me afterwards. But to be honest, my heart is it's doing okay. I think it's a bit of mixed emotions. I think the world that we live in today, I would say it's probably fairly normal in this time with the pandemic, with so many struggling and so many hardships that have been out there today for so many that. It's hard to wake up every day and be optimistic about what the day entails. But, I'm very hopeful that now as the vaccines start to roll out globally and we're starting to see a downtrend in the number of cases that we are towards the tail end of this. And hopefully at some point in the near future, there will be some sense of normalcy. For me personally, I lost my father with a 5-year battle of cancer during COVID. And so that's something that still weighs very, very heavily on me and something that, I'm probably still processing. But, one thing it did was open my eyes to probably the millions of other individuals out there today who've lost loved ones during this time. And just the overwhelming challenges that amongst itself presented that never before you had faced. And so I'm hopeful that we're on the other side of this in the very near future.
Well, I'm sorry for your loss, Cole, and thank you for being here, and thank you for. I really acknowledge you for showing up and being.
Yeah. Thank you. And how are you? How is your heart?
Well, my heart is always grateful, even on bad days. But today it's grateful is my word. I've been asked like 3 times on the show the same question, and every time the word would be grateful. So I think that would be my word. Yeah, I'm grateful.
Yeah, that's good.
All right. So I've been working, or I worked in the corporate world, let's say, more than 10 years. And it came to my attention that empathy or compassion or even kindness, it's not very common in the corporate world. Your application or your business says otherwise. You're focusing on bringing back the empathy and the human connection to the corporate world and to the business world and to the entrepreneurship. How do you find it now? Is it working? Is it what's the impact? Tell us more about this.
Yeah, I think, from a logical standpoint, I think we all take a step back and assume that just simply being able to share and vent and connect with others has a positive impact. But I think oftentimes that gets questioned because so many assume that unless you're speaking to a licensed professional, that perhaps that you can't see an impact. And I think one of the things that's most exciting about our service is that we've been able to, backed by data science, prove that 97% of individuals, of callers who come to our platform, leave our platform in a more positive state of mind than what they did when they called in. And so, for one, it's exciting for us to say, well, we knew this was the case, but now we can actually prove it. And so, human beings, human connection actually is truly making an impact. And I think that's something that's so exciting for us as a business and as a service, is to be able to truly prove out that human connection is powerful and it can truly change people's lives.
I totally agree. Yes. Do you think an apathetic person can become empathetic?
I do. I think that there's certainly skills and traits that you can learn, certainly with practice. I'm probably living proof that I haven't always been a great listener. I'm very fortunate that my wife is my sanctuary of empathy. She's an unbelievable listener, and with a tremendous amount of patience, she's allowed me to become a better listener over the last couple of years. And so I do believe that work and picking up certain traits and skills can certainly allow anyone to hone in on being a better listener.
Okay, that's interesting. I don't know why, but I feel like when someone has apathy, it takes more effort. It takes more energy, more awareness into becoming an empathetic person. Like I remember once when I was still an employee, I submitted a request to take 1 day off to take care of my mental health. 2 weeks later, I got fired.
Oh, wow. Yeah, sorry for that.
No, it's okay. I built my business because of that. But what I wanted to say is that a lot of people would not be able to empathize with others. Is that because their priorities are different? Or is it because how they were raised, or because of traumas? I know it's different from one person to another, psychologically speaking, but in general, what do you think is the general cause or problem with when someone cannot empathize?
Yeah, I think typically, I think it's a combination of all the above that you shared, and as you stated, it's probably very individualized from one person to the next. But I think, what we really see creating such a strong connection and impact for others is based around a shared experience. So I think oftentimes it's really hard for individuals to potentially be vulnerable, be empathetic, and understanding someone else's situation if they've never been in that situation before themselves. And so, oftentimes our highest impact and our strongest connections that we have through our service are individuals who are willing to be vulnerable and share in their experiences. And then others who are potentially going through something right now that is similar in nature have the opportunity to connect. And so that shared experience, that shared bond is what's so meaningful and creates such a strong connection. And so I think oftentimes the lack of empathy is the lack of understanding as to someone's situation.
How can we deal with that as a highly empathetic person?
How what's that? I'm sorry.
How can we deal with someone like this when we are highly empathetic?
Yeah, I think oftentimes we have to take a step back and see the bigger picture, and that's really hard to do. I think in the world that we live in today, but it's setting boundaries, and I think it's certainly necessary, right? The world that we live in today has forced us into somewhat of more of isolation and loneliness because of the pandemic at large, and because of that, we become reclusive, and instead of reaching out to ask others who may be in need how they're feeling or what they're going through, we oftentimes are focused on our own challenges that may be right in front of us. And so I think it's setting boundaries and being comfortable and taking a step back and doing just as you did as we started the show, to saying, how are you feeling? And I think that's where it starts.
That's interesting. I was talking with a friend the other day, and we always reflect on what we have learned and share these kind of stuff. And I told her, I think my lesson for this year would be how to set boundaries to my empathy, because at some point, too much empathy can basically backfire on you if you do not know how to protect your energy and protect yourself from being too empathetic. Do you see that with dealing with people?
We do. I mean, we obviously encourage empathy and to share what it is that you've gone through in your experience, because it is through that empathy that we believe that ultimately that's what is impactful and creates that change for others. But you're exactly right. I mean, it's extremely important to set boundaries, and that you maintain healthy boundaries for yourself, because you can find yourself extending yourself from an empathetic position, and being there for everyone, and oftentimes not looking after yourself. I heard you say in one of your podcasts that you actually have a sticky note behind you on your desk that says, something of the effect of, the best way to take care of others is to
I
take care of
think
myself.
yeah.
I certainly applaud you for that, because I think oftentimes as a highly empathetic individual, I think you take a step back and you're focused so much on helping everyone else that ultimately you're not focused on yourself enough. And then therefore you can't truly be there for others. And so I think that's a fantastic note that you have.
Thank you. Thank you for that. All right. So you are a man who's empathetic. I'm a woman who's unempathetic, but scientifically and socially and emotionally, we cannot be the same when it comes to empathy. Could you share with me a little bit of differences? What's the difference between men and women when it comes to empathy? How do you empathize as a man?
Yeah, I think as a man, empathy is challenging. It's something that's a constant that I'm constantly working on, to be honest with you. And like I said, I'm very fortunate to have that foundation in my home, not only in the family that I grew up in and surrounded by my father, who was an empathetic, as a male figure in my family, my two grandfathers who were two of the most empathetic individuals that I had ever met. So I was very fortunate to have that in my family, and now with my wife. But it is something that I struggle with and focus and try to focus on daily. I think, as men, we're very much fixers. And so I
Right.
think that we're always trying to fix things. And so what I've come to learn the hard way is that you can't always fix things overnight. Sometimes it's simply about processing and sharing and being empathetic and understanding in not only your situation, but others. And so, I think one of the biggest difference, in my opinion, from a male perspective, and really trying to take a step back and understand how I process things. I've really used to, I used to understand, or I used to think I understood what a solution was, and I would jump in head first. Now I've really taken a step back and tried to slow down and processing what it is that I'm actually feeling and that I might actually be going through. And that's something that I haven't done before. And I think it's also constantly a challenge to be able to reach out and ask others for help. And I'm transparently still not great at that, but it's something that I'm working on.
It takes courage. It takes courage to show up and try work hard to leave an impact, and yet admit that you are a work in progress. Like at the end of the day, we are all humans, and we're all a work in progress. No matter how much you think you master something, there's always something to learn and to work on.
Absolutely. There's always room for improvement every day.
Yeah. So every one of us had a wake up call to reach where we have reached, or to maybe do this transformation in our lives where we live a life and then poof, we transform it 4 years later, let's say. What was your wake up call?
Yeah, I think my wake up call for me really came with my personal experience with my father, who I shared with earlier. But my father was first diagnosed with cancer 5 years ago, and his cancer was one that the only cure was a stem cell transplant. And out of 18 million people in a bone marrow bank, there wasn't actually a match for my father. So as the firstborn male, I became his best match. At the same time, I was going through some other things in my personal life that were quite challenging. And so between the idea of that, if my stem cells didn't work, my father wasn't going to make it, which unfortunately is what happened after 3 different transplants. and then what I was also dealing with in my personal life, I found myself in a place that I was not familiar with, a place that I was unequipped to handle as a man and as a guy who grew up in the country. I grew up on a farm and ranch with the mentality of, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I was very fortunate to have a very empathetic family, as I shared with you, but I wasn't ever really one to talk about my feelings or what I was going through. I didn't want to reach out for help because I always felt like I was a burden to others. But for the first time in my life, I kind of reached a breaking point. And so I reached out for help and ultimately connected with a number of different licensed therapists, all who were fantastic individuals, but really for mostly reasons of compatibility, it didn't work for me. And so I walked away from licensed therapy, and I was very fortunate to meet an individual who ran support groups. But for reasons of stigma, I said, that's not something that I feel comfortable in doing. I can't go to a support group. But she agreed to meet with me one-on-one. And I was extremely lucky. She wasn't a licensed counselor, but she had very similar life experiences with a family member with cancer, had been through very similar life experiences that I was currently going through. And because of that, we really connected on compatibility. And she wound up being arguably the most fantastic listener that I had ever met in my life, and really changed my life. And over the course of the next couple of years, we stayed in contact as my father was going through his challenges with his battles with cancer. And because of that, I just continued to take a step back and say, I think that the system is broken. Every day I hear stories about, unfortunately, whether it relates to the rising increase in mental health or suicide or the epidemic of loneliness and isolation. And the reality is that our resources are just too small today when you look at it from a licensed perspective. And the reality is, and even as we've been able to demonstrate here as of late through backed by data science, is that you can have significantly meaningful impact through empathy and human connection. And so as I learned firsthand from this lady by the name of Camille was her name, as amazing listener as she was, I thought to myself, there are millions of individuals out there today who've chosen a profession or lifetime of empathy in what it is that they do. Why isn't there a way for us to connect on the most basic of human needs? This idea of human connection based around shared experiences, somehow we have voided because of the advancements in technology and where we are today. The irony is that we have more ways to connect than we've ever had in the history of our society, yet we're the loneliest that we've ever been. I often tell people we've replaced handshakes and hugs with likes and comments on social media, and we've become very distant from the reality of where we started, which was all based around community. And so how do we bring community back into the picture and share those experiences so we can benefit and help each other? And so that's really what changed for me in the last couple of years, was going through my own personal experience and seeing the impact that this individual had on me. And because of that, I truly believe in what it is that we do and the impact that we're having.
I gotta say, I'm really, thank you for sharing this. This is really genuine, and this is exactly what's going on. So thank you for being real. I couldn't have said it better. And again, I'm so sorry for your loss. But again, we learn, we live and learn. And I like when people take something that has happened to them and try to leave a legacy or make an impact around the world.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I often tell people what I believe that we're doing is my father's legacy. I grew up, as I shared, in a very empathetic home. My father was very empathetic. He was even a city appointed official. And not only was he empathetic with our family and the local community, but as a city appointed official, you can't always have everyone who's happy with you as a public appointed official. And, I watch my father oftentimes be overly empathetic to individuals who I probably wouldn't have. And so because of that, I've really believed that we have the opportunity to Yeah, no, for me, I think I look at this as really my father's legacy. My father was one of the most empathetic individuals that I knew, that I had ever met. Even, sorry, I'll start that over. Um, my father was one of the most empathetic individuals that I've ever known. And, I watched my father share his empathy not only with our family and the local community, but also with complete strangers growing up. And I think one of the things that I learned in my experience with Camille and her being the most fantastic listener that I had ever met was originally I felt very alone in my situation. And I thought that I was alone in my experience as well. And what I came to learn that I certainly wasn't. I was very alone in my situation, but millions of other individuals had a very similar shared experience as I had, unfortunately, with losing a loved one or a family member who was living with cancer. And so it was because of that shared experience that I had with Camille and being able to have that conversation that ultimately really impacted my life and what I was going through. And so I believe we all have stories to tell and experiences that we can share that can benefit and help others.
Of course, definitely. Um, when I lost my dad, the only thing that I wanted was empathy. I did not want anyone to come and tell me how life will be later on. I did not want anyone to come and offer me any kind of support or help, or I don't want that. I just want someone to empathize with me. And that takes us to a very important point that I don't know if you had that, but people don't know how to empathize with someone grieving. So, how do you think empathy could leave an impact or could benefit mental health situations or conversations like grieving?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that we get asked a lot is really empathy as it relates to mental health. And one of the things that I want to make sure that we address is I think oftentimes people tend to gravitate towards the clinical view of mental health, which overlooks the power of simply just listening. It also supposes that everyone needs to talk to someone at the highest level, whereas listeners on call really serves to be that place where an individual goes to take that first step or the first step in the continuum of care, if you will. I think, oftentimes that is the most challenging is taking that first step. And so when you talk about empathy, I think, I really see empathy as the first step of the individual who's reaching out to understand what's next. And so I think about from a grieving and loss standpoint and my own personal perspective, I'm much like you. I didn't want anyone to talk to me about what tomorrow or what next week looks like. I simply wanted empathy and understanding of what it is that I was going through. But where I found it really challenging to process that was unless I really felt like, and even still feels like someone has been through that same or shared or similar experience, it's really hard for me to even accept that empathy.
Yeah.
So I think that's where I find our service and quite frankly, just the shared experience of human connection so invaluable is the ability to be vulnerable in your experience and being able to share that with someone else. Ultimately, to me, those are the strongest connections and the greatest impact that we can have.
I totally agree. Yes. I
Yeah.
do hope that, I always say that I do hope that one day we would be having conversations that are not gender biased. I don't want to be telling people I'm here to raise awareness on men's mental health or women empowerment or whatever. I want us to speak the language of humanity. And I remember one of the episodes, I think it was with Leon, when I said, kindness should not be something that we remind people of. And yet here we are doing campaigns and doing shows. And you know what I mean? We were reminding people of the basics, which are listening, empathy, kindness, compassion, don't judge, these kind of basics. And you just mentioned something which is very important, which is among every way that connects us together, yet we're disconnected and we're feeling lonely.
Yeah.
What do you think happened?
Well, I think there's a tremendous amount of data out there today that would would focus around the disconnection based on the advancements in technology. I mean, when you start to look at everything that's going on in our world today, whether it be from social media to gaming, we've provided more and more technology solutions, if you will, or technology advancements that allow us to operate as an individual. You think that when I was growing up in a community, we didn't have a lot of those technologies to interact with. So you were forced to go out and participate as part of this community. And, you and your friends were having to meet outside because there was no way for you to stay in your room playing a video game or isolated on social media.
Blind trees for fun.
Right. Right. And that seems so foreign to most people today, is climbing trees. Right. I 100% agree. I had a fort out back at my house, and that was a big part of what we did. Right. And now it's very rare that I ever see a fort in a tree anymore.
Yeah.
So I think that we've become more and more reclusive as a society because of the technology advancements. And sadly, I don't know that I see that changing with where we're headed with AI and chat bots. And I believe technology certainly has its place and its purpose, but my hopes is that we have the opportunity to bridge that gap of disconnection before it's too late, and allowing technology to be this bridge, if you will, of human connection. I think when we really launched Listeners on Call, my focus there was to say is that we have a very human problem. We have the disconnection in our society that's a very human problem, and technology is not solving that problem. So rather than trying to create another technology solution to solve a human problem, why don't we leverage human beings to solve a human problem? It sounds so novel in its idea, but the reality is quite simple, is that the problem in our country and in our world today is not that there's a lack of empathy, it's access. We have millions of people out there today who are empathetic individuals who truly want to be there to help and support and spread the word of kindness. But the reality is access. It's challenging. Cultural barriers, cost barriers, the barrier of stigma. There's a lot of barriers out there today. And so our focus was to say, how can we break down those barriers to make it as simple as something like the Uber of empathy, if you will, to be able to connect with somebody in your time of need. And so I hope that that's ultimately the legacy that we get to leave behind. And that's certainly the impact that we're trying to make.
I love that Uber of empathy. I love it. Cole, how do you hope to impact the mental health community with your business?
Yeah, I think Listeners on Call is really where I hope to leave my impact and my legacy, my father's legacy of empathy. I think that, one of the things, as I shared, we've been able to demonstrate the impact that our listeners are having today. We also believe that listeners can change the world, and it's not just someone who comes from a licensed background, but we want to encourage and empower individuals who have stories to share, to be vulnerable in their experience and to be willing to open up, because those stories, those experiences can truly change the lives of others. And so I believe that that's what we have the opportunity to do, and I think that we can do that at a global scale.
Yeah. I told you that I really hope that you find the resources to help you expand, and maybe we could have Listeners on Call in the Middle East, because believe me, we need that.
Yeah, I think the world needs more empathy, certainly now more than ever. And the reality is oftentimes it's just a phone call away. It's just, how do you get access to those individuals? And I think that's what hopefully we have the opportunity to bridge that gap.
Brilliant. I don't know why I'm having this question in my mind. So, you know me, I don't hold anything back. Men are known to be masters when it comes to coping mechanisms that are relying on humor, sarcasm, drinking their problems out, and these kind of stuff. How can empathy? Do you feel that men empathize with each other when they're alone having a drink? Did we reach that or not yet? Like I'm seeing a lot now, it's very common to have men groups supporting one another, listening to one another, but it's not as, common as I want it to be. Like I really would like to see more of that men empowerment. What do you think of that? What's your opinion of that?
I am not currently part of a men's group. I'm very fortunate to have a couple of very close male friends that I can have those conversations with. So I'm very fortunate to have those relationships. But that hasn't always been the case. And even with those within those relationships, there's been many times where I felt like, quite frankly, that they couldn't understand what it was that I was going through because I knew that they had never been through that same situation before. So that's oftentimes even been a struggle, even with having those relationships. So I think fear of judgment is one of the biggest challenges out there today for men. I think whether that's in your personal life, in a group of friends that you may play golf with, the last thing that you want to be seen as somebody who's weak or vulnerable or always has something going on in their life that they need to share. And that's certainly not the case. But I think that fear of judgment is something that really paralyzes a lot of men into not being vulnerable and sharing what it is that they're going through. And then certainly in the workplace, right? The fear of judgment in your profession, in your career, and what impact that may or may not have in your career, I think oftentimes prevents men from being willing to open up and to share.
That's a very important point you just highlighted, which is they don't know what I've been through. And here's when empathy becomes so strong that I don't need to understand exactly how you're feeling to empathize with you.
No, exactly. And I think one of the things that we've done in our platform too, our callers have the ability to remain anonymous in our platform. I think anonymity is so important because, again, removing that stigma early on, especially, as a male, that personally was one of the biggest challenges that I faced was stigma and someone finding out that I was seeking out help. As crazy as that sounds, that really kind of paralyzed me in my judgment of what it was that I was doing. And so the idea of maintaining anonymity, or instead of going to a support group, I had the chance to just meet with one individual, really is ultimately what changed my story. And so I think that's really important, is to understand what are the things that are preventing you from seeking help, and then are there ways to overcome those?
Yeah, 100%. Cool. Is there anything that you'd like, if there's one thing you want men to take away from this, what would it be?
Hmm. That's a hard one. I think in my own experience, I would have told you prior to making that first call and reaching out that first time, probably even up until that morning, that I would never be the person that reached out, despite um, how bad of a place I was in at that time. But I'm very thankful that I did, and it ultimately has changed my life. And because of that, it has led me down this path. And so, as I said a second ago, take a step back and understand what are those things that are preventing you from reaching out. And if you aren't able to overcome those specific barriers or challenges, then look for a new path. Find a new path to connect to somebody. Find a way to maintain your anonymity if that's what it's about, right? If it's not about a group, if it's about an individual, right? Find a way to connect with somebody. But keeping it held in and keeping what you're going through bottled up is the worst thing that you can do. So however it is, understand what the challenges and barriers are in front of you. And if you can't overcome those, then look for a different path. So I would say that's what I think is most important, is there's always a way. But sometimes it just takes getting yourself out of the way and ultimately to find it. So
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much, Cole, for being here.
yeah, appreciate it. Thank you. I think it's amazing work what you're doing. And so I applaud you
Thank
10
you.
times over for what you're doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you.